So let me know when.
Okay, we've begun. Welcome, everybody. This was a collaboration between Alan and myself. The hope is that we, anybody who has never seen a CWSU or is kind of curious as to what they do and some of the things that are some of the parts of their job and interest, will get a chance to take a look at this. Most of you know Alan. Those of you who don't, he was a student meteorologist for about 1 year at the Tucson Weather Office. He then came to Glasgow for 2.5 years, and afterwards then went up to the Fairbanks office for 2 years before moving on to the CWSU in Salt Lake City. And he will be our presenter. So take it away, Alan.
All right. Hi, everyone. Like Grant said, I recognize so far everybody on this stream, but for those who don't know, I'm an aviation meteorologist here at the Weather Service CWSU at Salt Lake City. A lot of these slides here were produced also by Christine Cruz. She's a lead meteorologist now at Salt Lake City forecast office. I think a lot of these slides were developed a few years ago. But here's a little bit about my background. Like Grant said, I was at Tucson, Glasgow, and Fairbanks. Did a lot of work with the outreach and social media programs, mainly at really all three of the offices. Developed my GIS certificate through that. But here we go with CWSU. CWSUs were developed as a direct response to an airplane crash in 1978 due to a thunderstorm. And since then, when the CWSUs were set up, we directly support the aviation community by providing information 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. And we have 21 offices nationwide. Our direct neighbors in Salt Lake City, as far as CWSUs are concerned, are Seattle, Oakland, LA, Denver, and, Albuquerque is not quite direct, but close. And what we basically do is we do recorded and face-to-face briefings for air traffic controllers who control the aviation through the airspace. We do scheduled briefings, and we also do on-demand briefings if there's an issue with an aircraft or some kind of weather that they have any questions on. And it's mainly for air traffic controllers. We do seasonal training also for aviation weather threats, mainly spring and fall. We do pilot assist. We do IDSS. We're embedded with the FAA facility, so it's pretty easy to do that. As far as staffing, we're staffed from 5 a.m. to 9 p.m. We have our MIC. Rick is the MIC here for Salt Lake City. We have 3 full-time forecasters. Our in-person briefings are done at around 7:10 in the morning, and they were at 4:15 in the morning before COVID. Currently, we're not doing any in-person briefings due to COVID, but the recorded briefings still go on at around 5:45 in the morning, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and 9 in the evening. Our big hazards across our airspace during the winter and spring, we have icing, turbulence, low clouds, and visibility. So they're really focused on IFR, LIFR conditions, mountain obscurations due to clouds, snow and icy runways. The spring, it gets a little more active in the afternoon with these isolated thunderstorms that you guys get and Great Falls gets. Heat and high density altitude in June and July, blowing dust and smoke from wildfires. And weather is a big impact on the aviation community. These links do work, but they don't on PowerPoint. But if you were to copy that and paste it, if you have a copy of it, they do work, showing a pilot landing during a violent storm in Amsterdam. And this one, it shows the traffic flow through Atlanta through a series of thunderstorms. But here's a look at just kind of what we look at every day. With the wind and turbulence specifically, a lot of terrain influenced winds. We have a pretty decent mountain range just to the east of Salt Lake City. That's always causing some kind of turbulence or icing issues. We've up down valley and up and down slope winds. As far as low level wind shear is concerned, you guys know the causes to that, but local influences with thunderstorms, cold fronts, surface obstructions, and inversions. We get pretty significant inversions in Salt Lake City. I know you get some pretty decent ones too in Glasgow. Turbulence is probably some of the more impactful IRFs that we see. There's a difference between turbulence and chop. Mechanical and convective wind shear as well is a factor. We look at mountain waves, which is a big factor in Great Falls area with the Northern Rockies, also Western Wyoming with the mountains there, also just east of or just south of Billings. And here's just a quick, brief on the terrain influenced winds, what we're looking at, with the upslope beginning just after sunrise, upslope and up valley through the midday hours, and then downslope just before sunset. And here's just a look. I mean, I don't think you really get too much of the influence of this in Glasgow, but here's a look at Salt Lake City. And you have the southerly winds going through the town, and then you have the downslope winds coming from the mountains to the east into town as well. So we get some pretty strong wind gusts in the afternoon hours. And then, at daytime. This is the northerly winds and then the upslope winds. Gap winds also are a factor in throughout these mountain ranges. Again, the Northern Rockies are where I see it the most in our airspace. We do get it in the Wasatch Mountains east of Salt Lake City too. And here's what we're looking at: the slightly slower winds moving into the gap. It funnels through the gap, and then it increases significantly as it comes out. And those downslope windstorms can cause a lot of damage. We had one here just a few months ago where some of the gusts towards the closer to the mountains were over 100 miles an hour, and it was like that for most of the day. What causes these? You have easterly winds, cold dense air moving down. Easterly ridge level winds has those accelerate downslope. We had significant impacts in town. You can see that. You'll also be able to see that in some of those sites in central Montana. One of the biggest impacts we have at any of the airports here is a low level wind shear. I think it's probably fairly difficult for a pilot to see it on their own. So we really appreciate it when we see it in the TAFs. We'll brief it anyway if we think it's going to occur. But it's definitely, especially Montana does it a lot. When you're expecting wind shear, you see it in the TAFs, and it's great to see. But wind shear, especially low level wind shear, that can take a plane down really easily, especially a smaller aircraft. And you have two kinds of headwind shearing to tailwind, and that shoves the nose down of the aircraft, and they can hit the ground really quickly that way. Also, tailwind shearing to headwind, same issue. It pitches the nose up, they can stall. That video, the link works if you can see it, but it doesn't work from PowerPoint. Three kinds of turbulence. We have convective turbulence, which is basically the thunderstorms. Mechanical turbulence, obstructions to wind flow. That's going to be just the terrain mainly. And wind shear. Again, the intensity is related to wind speed and the roughness. And wind shear, mainly frontal down here. But we also see it caused by the inversions. We also see clear air turbulence that can definitely surprise the pilots. I think you see turbulence is pretty decent there, but the colder air closer to the surface and the warm air aloft. Mountain waves are a big issue in our airspace also. We see this, I don't even know how many times I've seen this in the Northern Rockies and central Montana. For a while, it felt like every day. But they develop up above and downwind of the mountains, and the waves generally remain stationary. You'll see the lenticular clouds, and sometimes you'll see rotor clouds. And this is probably where we get our most severe to extreme turbulence. Extreme turbulence is defined as basically loss of control of the aircraft. So that's definitely a big deal when we see extreme. And here we go with the symbols. If you're looking at the PIREPs on the Aviation Weather Center page, you see the symbols for the turbulence. The green arrow is light, moderate, severe, and extreme. I don't see extreme too often. It's usually moderate or severe. Oftentimes, if they get light turbulence, they don't report it. And turbulence, yeah, is aircraft dependent. The larger aircraft can handle a lot more of a variable airflow than those smaller general aviation aircraft, especially if it's low level turbulence. Those general aviation aircraft is who I'm worried about, because the bigger airlines have a little more leeway. They have a little more ability to get through it and react. Icing's a big issue too. You have rime clear and mixed icing. I don't know what that is, but rime icing is generally what I see here. Either rime or mixed icing. All three types can be pretty significant, especially the clear ice if the pilot doesn't see it. And some of the factors that are involved in icing are, the flight altitude, the airspeed, the water content, temperature, all that. It's also aircraft dependent. Some of those propeller planes are more susceptible to it. And you're looking at, again, the 0 to minus 20 degrees C. Why is it not going? There we go. And here's some of the icing hazards. Just decrease lift, decrease thrust. And there's the symbols for icing intensity. It's very similar symbols to the turbulence. I rarely see severe. When I do see severe or hear about it, it's a big deal because it's very quickly. Again, one of those things can take down an aircraft very quickly, and they have to get out of those clouds as fast as they can. And here's some of the significance, some of the actions they take for trace to light icing. They don't do a whole lot for light icing. Moderate's a little more significant. You have to use de-icing equipment. And then there's severe icing, which, like I said, you have to get out of that area right away. Frost on the aircraft skin is also an issue when they're on the runways, especially. It's the icing avoidance. And precipitation and icing. Freezing rain is definitely the biggest factor. For the heaviest icing. We do not want to see freezing rain in a forecast. We know it's going to be a busy day for icing if there's any kind of freezing rain or sleet anywhere near. There's also, if you're below like your super cold temperatures, 40 below, we don't see a ton of icing. Oops. Summer and spring, it's more thunderstorms, fire weather, and smoke. We had a pretty bad fire weather year last year. We had several instances of pilots accidentally flying into dense smoke, and that IFR conditions, they can't see a thing, but they're only VFR trained, so we had to help get them out of the area in a hurry. Thunderstorm hazards, the biggest ones with thunderstorms, lightning, hail, and also the gusty surface winds that can cause some pretty good turbulence and low level wind shear that you really weren't expecting. Thunderstorm hazards, the lightning hazard is to mainly outdoor airport operations. We're concerned about the people who are refueling the aircraft on the ground, so we do have to think about that too. Hail can actually damage aircraft, cover runways. It's just like ice on a runway if you get enough of it. Microburst, low level wind shear with the thunderstorms. Also, we look at the visibility. We're looking at webcams to look out ahead of it and see if we have any blowing dust visibility issues. Convective forecasts, we collaborate with the Aviation Weather Center every 2 hours during thunderstorm season to predict just the 40% coverage of that area of thunderstorm coverage. All 21 offices do it. We do it every 2 hours. Fire and smoke, as we know, reduces visibility. Also slant range visibility, which is basically how far a pilot can see along the ground from his vantage point, which is slightly different from what the visibility of an ASOS is. High density altitude, when it's really hot, reduced power, lift, and thrust. It takes longer to take off and climb. And that covers that. Oh, I have a few slides on that. What's this one about? Winter weather. Okay, topographically enhanced snow. We get a lot of that. Northern Rockies, also down here in Salt Lake City. Moisture forced up the western slopes. This says the Wasatch Mountains, any mountains, which enhances the precipitation. You don't get a whole lot on the downward side of that because it dumps it all on the upslope and on the summit. We get a lot of lake effect snow here. We're actually about to get some this afternoon and evening in Salt Lake City. You have warmer waters than the ground generally, and westerly to northwesterly flow over the lake, and that's going to feed that moisture right over Salt Lake City, and you'll get a few inches of snow out of that. And that can occur anywhere you get a good, decent sized lake. Fort Peck Lake up there in northeast Montana, we've seen it there too. Challenges in the west, we all know these, especially the radar coverage. Sparse observations, although I don't think they're as bad as they used to be. And also the complicated terrain, that's a big factor. Here's some of the resources we have and that we use: weather.gov, aviation.gov, or aviationweather.gov. We have our own website at ZLC, weather.gov/ZLC. Salt Lake City, of course, has one, and we cover the portions of 9 CWAs. So I'm constantly looking at those to see what their aviation forecast shows. Some of the resources we have, we produce SIGMETs, or the Aviation Weather Center produces SIGMETs and AirMets, usually in collaboration with us. The GFA shows forecast and observational maps. And basically the weather.gov is the weather forecast office, the public focus, the TAFs, the aviation discussion, the general forecast discussion. We utilize the TAFs a lot. The pilots especially, and the air traffic controllers primarily get their weather information from the TAFs. They don't tend to look at the the aviation discussion, but we do, and that's, we obviously incorporate that into our briefings. Here's an example of one of the products we produce, a center weather advisory. This one in the description is due to an area of thunderstorms with moderate rain and snow, and then we have small winds and small hail and gusty winds. And this is the second line, or I guess third line here, is the area, the geographic area it covers. This is the hazard, movement from, that's the direction it's coming from, and the speed. We do pay attention to storm tops because of the pilots. Can they fly over it? Do they need to fly around it? These are 2-hour duration products. They're issued for anticipated adverse conditions, so they're pretty much our version of a warning. And MIS is a meteorological impact statement. We use it for, I guess the closest you'd have at a forecast office, maybe an SPS or a hazardous weather outlook, something like that. It's longer duration. Usually potential impact on air traffic if it's a long-term downslope wind event or fog or mountain wave or something like that. I've also seen it used where if we have to use service backup because somebody has low staffing and one of our offices has to back up the other. I've seen it used there to inform Aviation Weather Center and also other offices. This is just a map of the radar coverage. Kind of, I think you guys have seen this kind of map before, but we use the radar quite a bit to see where things are going on, especially these outflow boundaries. Ceilometers and visibility sensors, we use those quite a bit as well. Pilot reports are very essential because it helps us say, okay, the environment's doing what we think it's doing. And here's kind of an example of what it is. Just the identifiers of the flight, what type of aircraft it is, the flight level, temperature if they have it, what their issue is, moderate turbulence if they have any icing issues, and any kind of remarks. Pretty much sucks. I've seen remarks like that in PIREPs. And that was that. And I wanted to bring up this screen. And this is where, if you can see it, this is where I will create a center weather advisory from. And I'll go and zoom in. Say I want to do something for icing here. I'll click on this. I'll type in my identifier. It's much like WarnGen, where I can just draw a polygon. And we'll say moderate ice. And then at my altitude, just for sake of argument, because I'm not going to send this out, we'll say 10,000 to 22,000 feet. We'll say it was reported by aircraft. And it makes a text here. I can copy this text here and bring it to another web page where I actually paste that in and send it out. I don't know if I have it open. Yeah, I do. Just real quick. Since I copied, I can just paste it. I select my time, which, okay, that's fine. We'll say it started at 210Z, and then we'll say 4Z, and then sends it out to the public. So they can, it's pretty quick to do. We also have a method of doing this through AWIPS too, but it's a little cumbersome with our AWIPS anyway. So with that, I guess, do we have any questions?
Yes.
Okay.
Alan, earlier on in your presentation, I saw the term Virga bomb. How does that impact aviation?
Where the heck?
It's on the thunderstorms or precip. I forgot. Convection?
Oh,
That's right after microburst. Yeah, microburst.
Okay, yeah, I didn't check the slide, but yeah, it's basically the same way as a microburst. You'll get those downdrafts. You'll create the strong downdrafts, which can force the plane down. Yeah, exactly, Tanya. It's basically dry microburst. Yeah, but yeah, it forces the plane down. It also increases that low level wind shear.
Okay, I thought I'd just ask that since we get lots of Virga here.
Yeah, you do.
Hey, I'll chime in, Alan. And Greg, it's nice to see you. The Virga bombs, especially in the Southwest, we can get outflow from something just more than a cumulus cloud. So when you're talking about Virga, in eastern Montana, maybe you have dew points in the 50s or 60s. Maybe you have Virga in January, February, so it's not like that. But in Nevada, southern Utah, when we can see Virga with the right conditions, they can generate 50, 60 mile an hour winds. And with that and the dirt composition down here, you get widespread blowing dust. So suddenly someone flying a smaller aircraft not only is getting into visibility issues, but getting into the low-level wind shear, getting into the downburst, getting into the strong gusty winds, could even be hail. And one thing that we see in this particular airspace, which is really rare but happens about once a year, is muddy windshields. So these guys are flying up around 8,000 feet or 12,000 feet, and suddenly this weather type can make it really difficult to see up there when they're getting mud sticking to their windshield.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like I saw that and I decided, I needed to ask a question about that because it's like, thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Rick.
Well, I had a question about your slant range visibility. We've talked about that in our office for a couple of years when we get the wildfire smoke going.
Yeah.
Is there kind of a rule of thumb you guys look at? Say, like if we're carrying, say, 4 or 5 miles on the surface visibility, do you kind of multiply that by 1.5 or something to get a slant-wise visibility?
I don't think so. Was there one that you know of, Rick?
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
It really just comes down to the difficulty a pilot may have, especially with the sun angle, depending on, you know, where a runway is situated and as they're coming down. If you have, you're looking through a longer column of sky as you're coming in slant-wise, and then if that sun angle is such that it magnifies the difficulty in visibility. So that's why we raise that specter periodically when it's, you know, valid, which is typically what, June through September across the western U.S. with the fire smoke.
It's getting longer, yeah.
But we also get that with inversion type visibility issues as well.
Okay, thanks.
I have a compliment and a question. The compliment is you guys are always so proactive on social media. So I just think that's awesome. Just want to thank you for that. My question is there something that drives you all nuts that the WFOs do or don't do that could be improved?
I'm thinking. I don't have anything really that I can think of. I mean, I can think of stuff that they do well, like when you do add the low-level wind shear in the TAFs. That's great because, I mean, I can recognize that it might be there, but if I have it in the TAF, I'm like, okay, they looked at the soundings or a forecast sounding, so I don't have to necessarily go through every site I've got and look at a forecast sounding and go, hey, do I want to brief this region for low-level wind shear or not? But if they don't, I mean, okay, that's fine.
And no from me. WFOs are always a pleasure to work with. We have 9 within our airspace, so yeah, there's a lot of different forecasts to look at and collaborate. And if it comes down to that, we have never had a difficulty collaborating with an individual WFO. So nothing comes to my mind when you ask the question, Tanya, of you know, what are these WFOs doing that routinely upset us? There's nothing that comes to mind.
No, not at all.
You guys use our digital aviation grids. Do you look at those at all or not?
We don't have GFE, so we can't. Or you mean online?
Yeah.
I do. I look at the stuff online. I don't know. I don't know about if other CWSUs do or not. I just know what we do, but I do. Yeah, that was the thing coming up here. I was like, oh, I don't have GFE. What?
Are there plans in the future for you guys to at least be able to look at that stuff in a AWIPS format or no?
Well, the digital aviation movement kind of stalled out a few months ago.
Yeah, I remember.
I think I'm losing my timing here, so it may have been close to a year ago. But,
it's not that the issue.
this came from a region, so either national or region. I can't remember. So the one we would deal with most closely would be Salt Lake WFO because we're a top 30 airport that has a meaning somewhat, but Salt Lake City's airport, so the TAF there is critical for traffic management across the United States, or what is called the national airspace. And we were moving toward that, and then it stalled. So once that gets kind of reinvigorated, I guess that's the office we'd work most closely with.
But as far as you know, there's no plans right now for you guys to see those aviation grids in an AWACS environment.
No, I thought that was ultimately the plan, but no, not at this time.
Okay.
No.
Unless, as Alan suggested, it's taking it to the next level and viewing it online, the output.
Yeah.
But the objective really would be, I feel like I'm kicking a dead horse. The objective would be that we could manipulate the grid in kind of a collaborative environment where, you know, it might be a precursor gridded TAF and they send us a little alarm and we look at it and go, ooh, I thought we might drop visibilities down a couple here and maybe up the wind over here, so we could manipulate those. We're far from that right now.
Yeah. That'd be nice.
Well, thank you both
Alan and
for
Rick.
doing this today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I have a quick question for you, a real interesting take. I was talking with Sarah Rogowski a year or two ago, and she had said that our airspace is actually one of the most important ones because it was a main vital path for aircraft entering the United States. Is that true? And can you comment on that and maybe let our forecasters know how important our airspace is over our head?
Yeah. I don't know the percentage or the numbers, but I would wager to say most of, if not most of the international travel, certainly most of the travel within the United States, east-west, travels through the airspace. A lot of it goes over Montana and Wyoming and Idaho and those areas. I would imagine most of the Canadian traffic does too. I know a lot of the traffic from Alaska, I'm pretty sure, does, if it's coming down here, or if it doesn't, directly, it goes through Seattle and then goes across. So between us and Seattle, we're probably two of the more important ones. Yeah.
Well, I meant over our CWA, over the Glasgow CWA.
Over Glasgow.
Entrance for international flights, yeah.
I'll chime in a little bit, Alan. It's an incredibly busy corridor. If you just imagine LaGuardia, Boston, DC, the urban corridor of the East, and all those giant airports, and even Atlanta. Charlotte is now a hub. Cincinnati's a hub. Detroit, Minneapolis. All those planes flying to the west are early in the morning. They're, from a national airspace perspective, planning on where those flights are going to cross. And so I liken these flight paths to interstate highways. And one of them is right over Glasgow's CWA. It's right over eastern Montana.
Yep.
And the only thing that's going to muddle that is weather. So if we have some massive weather system that's moving down, they would appropriate that traffic. So they might close that interstate and move it somewhere else. Typically, the weather impact that would do that would be thunderstorms, and especially a big old line of thunderstorms.
Yeah.
What can also happen there, if we get a big old line of thunderstorms that are in eastern Montana, and they're kind of a north-south orientation, which we see, they can go as far as directing that traffic farther south, or they can talk to Canada and ask for permission to send those flights up into Canada. And we typically don't fly into the Canadian airspace. But those are the types of decisions that are made by the National Airspace in Warrenton, Virginia, at the FAA Command Center, which is a place we have 4 or 5 what they call National Aviation Meteorologists. If you remember Brian Warren-Oskis from Great Falls, he is now a NAM, a National Aviation Meteorologist. And so every morning they're working with all the CWSUs and making these plans to anticipate. Are we going to see a line of thunderstorms over eastern Montana or western North Dakota that would force us to manipulate air traffic farther south or farther north? So yeah, you guys are a bullseye in the national traffic management flow regime on a daily basis. If something is going to interfere with that, it's a big deal.
Yeah, and I have an example. I think you had two or three really big storms this past summer. Who knows what day it was or month it was, but they were reaching, I think, 50 or 55,000 feet tops, and the air traffic controllers were kind of asking when this is going to end, probably, but because they had to divert something like 80 planes, and it's only been going on for an hour and a half. So they had to divert, a bunch of planes down south towards, I think, towards Denver, that area. So yeah, it's a big deal.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, if we don't anticipate that, then you get a traffic jam, right? So it's like orange barrel season in Montana, right? If you don't anticipate what's going to be happening on this highway versus that highway, then suddenly every car on that road is diverted to this road, and now you're overburdened. And that is where you start getting delays, and they start telling airplanes in New Jersey, you're not going to take off for 2 hours because we have too many planes landing at SFO, or too many planes landing at LAX, or too many planes landing at Seattle. So they have to stop that. Anticipating it at 5 a.m, our time, which is 7 a.m. on the East Coast, where they're making these plans for flow, anticipating this and being good at meteorology is what can help ease these traffic jams before they occur. So they can plan like, hey, we're going to take half of these that fly over eastern Montana, and we're going to fly them over southern Utah. Like I said, there's like interstate systems for these, and they typical flow on a typical day. And it's meteorologists who are the ones that get to throw a wrinkle into their plans on any given day.
Yep. Great. Thank you, guys.
Yep.
All right, I got a question on my end. You were talking about downslope and mountain waves earlier.
Yeah.
We're probably not directly affected ourselves, but our backup sites are, such I would imagine Bozeman or Great Falls. How far downstream do these mountain waves actually occur? And is there a time or a season where they're more common than others?
Generally, as far as how far downstream, they generally a few dozen to 100 miles, but they can go as far as 600 miles downstream, so it can be quite a ways. As far as a time of year, since I've been here, I've noticed it more in the fall and winter, quite a bit more. I think Rick would probably have a better handle on if that is normal or not.
No, you're right. That's exactly true. But the reality is that we can get them in the summer as well, even though we may have lighter flow if it's tangential to a mountain range. And then you have other factors to consider within air mass that can make them, so even a 40-knot wind at 30,000 feet can create a mountain wave if you have the right stability issues there. And Alan's correct. These mountain waves can occur way downstream.
Thank you on that. One other question I had here. How closely embedded are you with air traffic controllers in terms of briefing them on regular basis or just visiting with them?
We're in the same not only in the same building, but we're also on the same floor. I mean, they are literally down the hall. The air traffic controllers, the traffic management folks who control the flow, the flight data folks who enter the PIREPs, they are within 50 feet, all of them. So, well, maybe 100 feet for the controllers, but very close. And we we go down there and we brief them. If we see anything that we think that they're going to need to know or want to know, we will go down there and proactively and say, hey, this is what's going on.
Another thing that you had shown us there was the actual PIREP forms, and that looked like it was a paper format. Is that still even done, or have they moved on to a completely virtual format for that?
No, what happens normally is the pilot reports it to air traffic control over the radio, and the controllers have forms, paper forms. And most of the time, they bring that to traffic management unit or flight data who enter it into the computer system. Sometimes a controller does it directly if they're not super busy, but most of the time it's done by flight data. Flight data. But yeah, those paper forms still exist.
Alan, can you talk about what we talked about last night? How many air traffic controllers are on the floor at one time?
It's usually I think it's around 3 or 4 per area, so 16 to 20. But if it's busier, which it probably hasn't been during COVID since I've been here, but I believe it's usually about twice that. 40?
And I can chime in too. Those air traffic controllers, they kind of, so their airspace is broken down into like what we can relate to as zones. And anytime an airplane is going to enter your zone, you have to say hello and goodbye. So that's, I'm really simplifying it here because it helped me understand. But at a minimum, Southwest Airlines flight, blah, 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 she is going to enter the airspace, and there has to be a Southwest Airlines 21 Salt Lake Center, and Salt Lake Center says, hey, continue at 38,000 feet, blah, blah, blah. And then when they leave that zone, we call it a sector. When they leave that sector, then they acknowledge, we're leaving. So there's a hello and a goodbye, and they switch a radio frequency to get into the next sector or speak to the air traffic controller for the next sector. So if you think about it, flying at like 400 knots, these sectors aren't necessarily that big. So you're constantly as a pilot, co-pilot, flying across the country. If you're flying from Minneapolis to LA, I mean, you're like constantly saying hello and goodbye to these air traffic controllers. And the point of that is just to make sure everything's cool, everything's hunky dory. And if they don't, then
it's a big deal.
They label that as no radio contact, and then they have to get in touch with those folks. And the last extreme in that scenario is F-16s go up and start investigating who's flying that airplane. But in between all that, there's like calls to the airline. The dude may call the pilot's cell phone. Hey man, turn your radio button on, dude. Right? And sometimes they have it's a switch, and sometimes a guy adjusts his seatbelt and he hits the switch, and now they're not able to communicate. But the pilot, isn't thinking about that, which is weird because you figure he's got him. Sooner or later he's flying across Wyoming. I haven't talked to somebody in 20 minutes. That's weird. So, that's. Those air traffic controllers is constantly talking to these airplanes. And if you ever come visit, we can sit you down with those folks, and it's kind of cool. I never really get tired of plugging in with an air traffic controller and just listening to them talk to pilots. And it's not just, hello and goodbye. It's, how are your rides up there? Everything okay? Yep. And then if something yucky goes on, like they're having a medical condition, they need to change where they're going to land. And, that's where they earn the money.
All right. Declaring emergencies and all that. One of the other things that you probably don't deal with it in Glasgow, but you would in Great Falls, is like with the taps, the winds are very important. Like Salt Lake City, if that wind direction, if the tap says the wind's going to switch at 21Z, it's 2105. And if we haven't contacted them, the tower is contacting us saying, hey, what are these winds going to do? You have it switching to the south. I'd really like to stay on North Flow if it's going to stay there, because they're landing from the north instead of the south. You have to turn around the whole airport. Is it going to switch around? Is it going to switch around for 10 minutes and then go back to north? What's it going to do? And then as weather moves in, that just complicates it significantly. So there's that too.
So, Alan and Rick, we might definitely take you up on that. If I ever get the chance, I'll try to come down there and actually see the CWSU with you guys. But one of the other things we wanted to talk about here is general collaboration between WFOs and CWSUs. I know you guys are available on NWS Chat. For anyone who doesn't know, they have their own room in NWS Chat where we can talk back and forth. Are there any things that you would prefer or would really appreciate heads-ups on from the local WFOs, like thunderstorm days, timing, anything like that?
I think Alan hit with the low-level wind shear. That's a big deal.
Yeah.
For us. And, volume at airports makes them kind of more significant, right? Like that's why Salt Lake City is considered a top 30 airport, because the volume of commercial flights coming in and out. But I can tell you this, air traffic controllers don't talk to general aviation as a typical rule, right? So a person who's driving to Lewistown to get in their plane to fly to Evanston, Wyoming, is, for all intents and purposes, off the radar. We don't know that this person's doing that until that person who's flying through a winter storm warning calls air traffic control and says, I've got icing and I can't see anything because I'm in the middle of all these clouds. Can you help? And then they'll run down to us and say, can you get this guy out of the icing? Can you find a hole in the clouds? And then we call that a pilot assist. And so the weird thing is, on any given day for that person's entire life, they may never talk to an air traffic controller except when they're in real danger.
Yep.
And so I bring that up because general aviation is, they're the ones that we see getting in trouble and having accidents. And if a general aviator, just ma and pa flying an airplane, have to contact an air traffic controller and it gets real bad, that messes with someone's head, man. You don't want to be the last person that spoke with those folks when they went down. That's traumatic for anyone involved. And so, when they talk about air traffic control being a stressful job, that's probably the number one reason why. On any given day, you have no idea if you're the one who's going to talk to an airplane who's having that kind of situation. And I wanted to bring that up as kind of a perspective for your question regarding, how it is that you can support us better and this and that. You're generating the products that we use to brief the air traffic control user base and doing a lovely job. And then, we love the forecast discussion, the aviation discussion in your AFDs. And so most of it's there. And I think if if it went beyond that, like, hey, what do you guys think of this or that? I don't think we hesitate to communicate.
Yeah, we contact you too, as well if we had any questions. I'd get you on chat or on phone, either way. And vice versa. I mean, you could always contact us as well.
Do we have any more questions in the room?
Grant, this is just a strange one, and I'm thinking of our SIG weather lists and all of those things. Do we have the phone number for the CWSU in that aviation phone book?
I know that it was always on the slip that we had just laying around.
Okay.
It should
The
be in
paper
there.
one.
If it's not, and I can go take a look. If it's not, I can make sure that it gets added on.
That'd be great. I'd hate to say in 20 years, I don't think I've ever called the CWSU, but
Well, before I got here, I had no clue what a CWSU is. I came in blind.
And we can tell you what that phone number is. If you want to copy it down, it's 801-320-2569. CWSU operations.
Thank you much on that.
You bet.
God, I did have one more question on this, and it was actually in regard to aircraft accidents. This is something where we used to actually take in the data, at least for the ASOS, for I think it was the last day or the couple hours before an aircraft accident that's occurred in our area. Has that moved over to you guys at all, or are you participating in that in any way, shape, or form?
Go for it, Eric.
No, I think it's still the
so.
same. I think WFOs are informed and then start that form. I think the WFO is still the one that submits that. Yeah, and there's an FAA form you guys do, and we at the CWSU are asked to do something different. We're asked to generate graphical and text weather summaries, and we get a half-inch thick packet of paper that we electronically send to the appropriate people within our facility so that they can store that with everything else that they gather. When they have a situation like that, they gather any tape of controllers speaking with pilots, and they go over the language type that they used, because they're trained to talk a certain way. And if you do it every day over and over for 30 years, sometimes maybe you forget or let go of some of the more formal parts of the language, and that can get them in trouble. So they go over every little detail. If someone has an aircraft incident, a crash, any kind of thing, whether they were talking with air traffic controllers. And then a part of that is us gathering weather data that we generated as well, right? So we're showing them the taps, we're showing them the observations, we're showing them any graphics that we used, tweets, that kind of thing. We're just gathering all this information so that lawyers on both sides can say, well, weather folks didn't do enough, or air traffic control didn't do enough, or the pilot may not have done enough, because there's a ton of information out there that maybe they weren't using to make their jobs easier.
All right. Anyone else have any questions? All right. Well, I guess we're good here. Thank you very much, Alan, for doing this. We very much appreciate it, and hopefully it's opened a couple eyes and given a couple people here some things to chew on. definitely thank you for being a big part of this.
Yeah, thanks for helping.
Thanks, guys.
Y'all have a great day.
Thanks. You too.
Bye bye.